Hey there, welcome to Not a Number. My name is Ricky. Thanks for tuning in today. And today we're going to be creating what you see here on the screen. You may have seen it floating around YouTube, something called the chaos game. And the way it works is you have, uh, at least in this example, these three anchor points here in green. And what it does is it places one random dot anywhere on the screen. And then the next dot it places halfway between that one and one of those three anchor points, and then keeps on repeating that process. From the second dot, it places another dot halfway between that one and another anchor point. And the interesting thing is, no matter where you place that initial dot, it always creates this exact same pattern that you see revealing on the screen. And I'll put some links in the description to a number file video that actually explains this in a lot more detail if you're interested, but it's actually not terribly difficult to recreate in JavaScript, so we're going to do that. So I have the second tab loaded up with an empty page, and in my code editor, let me make this a little larger, I have just a simple HTML file. The only thing that's in here is a title, including a JavaScript file, and then a canvas element that we're going to draw on. And then my JavaScript file is empty, so we're going to get started from here. Now the first thing I want to do is just put inline style tag on my body, and I'm just going to set the margin to 0. This gets rid of the default margin. So then inside of our JavaScript file, we're going to create a chaos game object that will house most of our JS. So var chaos game, and I'm going to put this inside an anonymous self-executing function. So what that means is I'm going to create a function, pretty standard, and then to get it to execute immediately, I'm just going to wrap the whole thing in parentheses and then put double parentheses on the end. That will make it execute this function as soon as it's created. And then I'm going to create a init function in here. This will initialize the game window. So we're going to put function init. Doesn't need any parameters. And then what this function needs to do is it needs to make the canvas element. If I go back to the browser and look at my elements, I need to make this canvas element the entire size of the screen, and I'm going to set a default background color. So in order to get that canvas element, we're going to assign the canvas element to a variable here. So we're going to just select it using document.getElement by ID. We named it canvas. And then in order to start working with it or drawing to it, we need the context. So canvas dot get context, right? Get context, yes. And we're going to get the 2D context. But before we do that, I got a little ahead of myself. We need to set the width and height. So canvas dot width, and I'm going to set this to the document body offset width. And then for the height, I'm going to use the document body dot scroll height, and this will give you the entire. It'll give you the height of the entire canvas object. So now if we refresh this and look at the canvas element, it did not get bigger. What did I do wrong here? Oh, obviously. We need to actually call this. So in order to do that, we need to return it. We're going to return the init function as init, and then in order to call this at the right time, we're going to do this in the window download. And the reason we do this is because we're referencing a DOM element here. We want to make sure that DOM element is rendered to the page when we call it. So then we can just do chaos game.init. And of course, I always do this. I don't know why, but we're inside an object here. Don't need a semicolon. Now we're cooking with gas. Alrighty, so the next thing that we want to do is actually we want to set the default background color. So we're going to call the context dot fill style, and this basically is where you set the color you want to fill with, and we're just going to use a nice dark gray, and then we just call context dot fill rectangle. Helps if you actually use a dot instead of a period. And then you get the coordinates here. It takes 4 arguments. It takes the top left corner and then the bottom right corner. So the bottom right corner is going to be the canvas width, and then we want the canvas height. And I'm a little stickler about putting spaces here. So now we should have a nice gray background on our canvas. Excellent. Alright, so that's all we need to, actually, and the last thing we need to do in our net is we need to create those 3 anchor points. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come down here and create another function. This is going to be a private function, so I'm going to lead it with an underscore, and I'm going to call this create dot, and it's going to take the same arguments that the arc command takes, and that's going to be the x coordinate of the basically the center of the dot, the y coordinate of the center of the dot, the radius of the dot. What is the next argument? I always forget. No, this is a start angle, the end angle, and then I don't have a clever way to shorten that. It's clockwise, and then in this particular instance, I'm also going to take color as an argument. And then, of course, I should put the function keyword in the beginning. That would help, right? And then what we're going to do is we need access to the context. But you can see up here, the context is hidden inside this init function. So we actually need to define context up here. And now it's available in the global scope. So now what I can do down here is we're going to begin our path. And the next thing we need to do is tell it that we're going to create an arc. And we're going to pass in all of these parameters from up here, except for the color, of course. So the start angle, the end angle, the clockwise, and that's all we need in here. And then we're going to set our fill style. And that's going to be equal to the color. And then we're going to fill. Right? So then from up here, we can create our first 3 triangles, our first 3 dots of our triangle. So in order to do that, all we need to do is call this create dot and pass in the x and the y that we want. So for the top middle, if I go back to the original example, for this dot up here, we want it 20 pixels from the top and then in the center. So our x coordinate is actually going to be canvas width divided by 2. Our y angle is going to be 20. That's how many pixels it is from the top. And then I'm going to do this with a radius of 3 is going to begin at 0. And this is in radians. And we want to draw an entire circle. And if you recall from your geometry class, the circumference of a circle in radians is 2 pi. So we're going to set this to 2.math.pi. That's going to create a whole circle. And then this is clockwise. It tells you if you want your arc to be drawn in a clockwise or counterclockwise manner. It doesn't really matter. So we're just going to set this to false. And then we also want to pass in, we want these dots to be green. So if everything happened correctly, I should be able to refresh this and get a green dot up here. I didn't, so what did I mess up? Am I even getting in here? Oh, you know what? I was missing an argument. I was missing this, the radius. We want to pass in the radius. Let's get rid of that. Now we're cooking with gas. So, we were missing that radius call. So we want 3 original, 3 beginning dots. I'll just copy this twice. The second one, we want in the bottom right corner, the bottom left corner. So we want it 20 pixels from the left. And then we want height minus 20 here. So canvas.height minus 20. And now we want canvas.width minus 20 for this one, and then canvas.height minus 20. So now we have our 3 original dots, and our setup is complete here. That's all we need in the init function. Let me get rid of this extra line here. Now we need a start function. And in this case, I'm not going to expose the start function. I'm just going to call it from the init. A lot of times, what you'll want to do is do something like this. You'll want to init it, and then at some point later, you might want to start it. So you just call chaos game to start. But in this case, we're going to start right away. So what I'll do is after we're done here, I'll just call start. So we're actually getting fairly close. The rest of this is not too terribly difficult. So what we want to do in our start function is we just want to create our first dot in a random position, right? So I'm going to abstract that into its own function. So create first dot. So then let me do that function, create first dot. And what we want to do is we want it in a random x and a random y. So we're going to need to define a getRandom function. So I'll define that in a second. So we'll just do var x. We're going to define a function called getRandom. And we're going to pass in 1 as a minimum value, and the canvas width as the maximum value. We're going to do the same thing with y, except we're going to make canvas.height our maximum value. And then we would just call this create dot but our x and y values are going to be x and y. And then we're going to make this a white dot. Now in order for this to work, obviously we need this getRandom function. And we're going to be able to pass it min and max value. And then I'm not going to get too far into this. This is a pretty standard getRandom function, but we're going to call return math.floor math.random, times max minus min plus 1 plus min. But basically what this does is it returns a random integer between your min and your max, excuse me, inclusive, meaning it can include your minimum value, it can include your max value, or a random value in between. And we're going to bump this radius down to 1 to make these dots smaller. And actually, let me set it to 10 just so we can see. We should see a random dot. If I refresh, we'll get a dot in a random position every time. But we're almost there. So let me set this radius down to 1. We go back and refresh. So now what we need is to create our next dot. And we're going to have to do a little bit of cleanup here, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So first, let's create our function, create next dot, and in order to create the next one, we needed to know where the last one was. And we're going to call it last random. Now, in order to know where to draw this next dot, if you remember the rules, we need to know where the last dot that was drawn is, and we need to know where one of the random anchor points was. So what we need to do is we need to store the value of the last dot, and we also need to store the value, the XY values of the anchor points. So let's start with the anchor points first. So I'm going to come up here and just create an empty object called anchors. So I can type, set that to an empty object. Now when we create the original 3 dots, we need to store these values in anchors. So we need to do anchors, and I'm just going to hard code it. Say anchors 1 is equal to an object where x is this value here, and y is equal to 20. And we'll do the same thing after the other 2 dots, the other 2 anchor points. So in here, x is equal to 20, and y is canvas.height minus 20. And here, x is canvas.width minus 20, and this is canvas.height minus 20. So now we've stored the anchor points. And then what we're going to do here is we are going to we're going to store this when we create our first dot. I'm going to create an object called this random, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to store x as x and then y as y. And then what we're going to end up doing is we're going to call create next dot and pass in this random. Right? So now when this dot gets called, we know the xy coordinates of the last random object that's created. So now we actually need to find an anchor. We need to find a random anchor to reference when we're placing this next dot. Right, so which of the, in this case, 3 anchors are we going to place this dot between? Sorry, I paused there for just a second because I realized as I was typing this that anchors is an object and you can't call dot length on that. But what you should be able to do is count the number of keys. Alright, so we've got a random anchor point that we're going to we got a random anchor point that we're going to reference against. So now we need the halfway point between our last dot and the anchor point. So I'm going to create a var half x, and this is going to be equal to math.absolute value of last random.x and plus corners, sorry, not corners, anchors, random anchor. So this will get our random corner.x, and then the halfway point is just that divided by 2. We'll do the same thing for y. So we want our half y. And then all we need to do is create a circle, or create a dot. This is going to be y, but then our x and y values are going to be half x and half y. Oops. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll copy this. This random is equal to half x and half y. And then we will call create next dot again. Now, in order to make sure that this is all non-blocking code here, we're not just building up the stack with function calls, I'm going to wrap this in a set timeout. So we do that by saying set timeout. We're going to put this inside of a function. And then in my example, I called this every 10 milliseconds. You could even set this to 0 if you wanted to just execute right away. I set it to 10 milliseconds in my example. So we'll just copy and paste this down here. And that just makes sure that this is non-blocking and we're not running into any issues. So if I did everything right, I'm not 100% sure this will work, we'll find out, but if I did everything right now, that should be it. So let's go back to our browser and see what happens. Okay, looks like we hit an error. Okay, it didn't like this. So what I had initially done in my example is I just hard-coded this. I knew that I was going to have 3 anchors, right? Probably isn't the best way to do it, but it kind of gets rid of some complexity. So now if we go back, 61, you don't like x. Oh, well. What are you choking on? Oh, you know what? I made some copy and pasta mistakes here. That'll do it, right? So I was just resetting anchors 1 every time instead of setting 1, 2, and 3. Alright. So you get to see all of my mistakes that I make along the way. It's not always pretty. There we go. So now we have a working example. You can see it actually started over here and worked its way there, but then it always falls into making this sort of a pattern. So there we go. That's it. That's how you make a chaos game using a triangle. The triangle setup inside of JavaScript using HTML5 canvas element. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, feedback, anything like that, please leave a comment. And then if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please subscribe to the channel and you'll get notified when I make new videos. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.